This is Jason Romano from Sports Spectrum. Remember, success is a choice. And what choice are you going to make today?
Providing insights to help you grow your business, improve yourself, and add value to those around you. You're listening to the Success is a Choice podcast, where you get a peek into the lives of industry leaders as they share their stories with you.
Welcome to Success is a Choice podcast, and I'm your host, Jamy Bechler. And today we have a guest that will be familiar to many of you that follow big-time athletics. Mike Hamilton is the former athletic director at the University of Tennessee, who has one of the largest budgets in the country and is always in the spotlight as a premier SEC school. After leaving organized athletics, Mike has been involved in many charitable causes. He is currently the executive director of Show Hope, an organization started by Christian music superstar Steven Curtis Chapman. Mike is also the founder and president of Winfred-Henry Partners, an athletic consulting company. It's our pleasure to have Mike Hamilton joining us on the show today.
Jamie, great to be with you.
Yeah, Mike, you've had a storied career. You've done so many things. And what are some of the things that stand out to you and that you're most proud of as you look back on your career?
You know, I think the thing that when I look back, without a doubt, and this would be different from what a lot of folks would think about most likely when they're talking about athletics. But for me, it's the relationships with the student athletes that you encounter during your time in athletics and the ability to see literally transformation of lives during the time that these young men and young women come onto a campus. Oftentimes as, let's just call it 17-year-old kids and leaving as 22, 23-year-old adults. And that's the most gratifying part of the whole job. And the thing that I have my greatest memories of. Certainly there are a lot of victories and championships along the way too, and relationships with coaches and fans and donors and that kind of thing. But it's those relationships with the actual student athletes that I cherish the most.
This podcast is called Success is a Choice. And so what would you define or success as, or how would you measure success throughout your career?
Well, you know, particularly as Americans, we tend to measure that based upon the numbers in the left-hand column, the W column, right? And in athletics, it's often in terms of games and championships, and certainly that's one way to measure it. And we were fortunate to have a lot of success when I was at Tennessee, as it's measured by the Directors' Cup. We had some of the highest finishes Tennessee's ever had in its history. And then we failed, to see success in some places along the way in sports, and you learn from that. But I still go back and just even today, I look at relationships, on Facebook with guys that I still remember them as kids who are now in their early 40s, and they're staying in touch with me about their jobs and their careers and their families and those kinds of things. And those are the measurables that I care about the most. The moments that Coach Dickey, who was my predecessor and who I consider one of my greatest mentors, he always talked about the fact that in athletics you sort of had to operate in the middle of the road emotionally, because there's never a business probably that is more extreme in the way it sways. The highs are high, very high, and the lows tend to be very low. And I'm fortunate to have been at a place where we experienced a lot of highs.
Looking back on your career, there's always adjusting, there's always adapting, there's always evolving. What are some things that, as you look back, you would have liked to done differently, or you would have done differently, if you'd known then what you know now?
How much time do we have, Well, let me make a statement first. It's funny, I was asked this question one time by Ivan Mizell, was doing a story about, interestingly, Coach Kiffin. This is after Lane had left and gone to Southern Cal, and I think even after he had been let go at Southern Cal. And he was asking me to reflect back on the hire and ask me what I would have done differently. And that's always an interesting question, because the reality is we don't have the benefit of redos. I told him that I would have loved to have had some different outcomes perhaps, but when we were making those decisions, we were making the best decisions we knew how, based upon the data that was available and what the institution needed and what would seem to be right and perfect for the institution at that time. That having been said, things that I would do differently now as I've matured and and been out, now 6 years, I guess, 6.5 years since leaving Tennessee. I think that though I feel like I always was pretty well connected to our fan base, and I feel like I was pretty well connected to our student athletes, I wish that I had even spent more time than I did with our coaches. And I think I spent time with our coaches, but in the end, that's the conduit for the ultimate success of the program on the field or on the court, but also that's the connection to the student athlete, which is what I've already alluded to being the most important thing to me. And I think that the longer I've been away from it, and based upon some other work I'm doing now, which I've shared with you offline with coaches, I think there's one of the biggest issues that we have in college athletics today is one of this communication dynamic between ADs and coaches. And what I mean by that is I think so many times there's almost a different dialect being spoken. An AD is consumed with on a lot of fronts and with a lot of different things, particularly when you're at a state institution with so many folks trying to grab your attention. And a coach is, honed in and focused on primarily coaching and recruiting and those kinds of things. But particularly at the level we were at Tennessee, there's so many other elements to the ultimate success. And for whatever reason, I think that in today's world, we've become much more attuned to what I'll call training for sprints in athletics versus training for marathons. And there was a time and place where decisions, I feel like, were made much more about the long-term future of an institution, the long-term future of an athletic program, and everything that went into those decisions would show that. Because of the dollars that are involved in college athletics today, the hot nature of social media and the Twitter universe and all those kinds of things, it's become much more of a sprint business than a marathon business. And I don't know that that's the best thing for college athletics in the long run. And so back to my thought in this question, I think that what we, as those who care about athletics, do, we need to figure out how do we close those communication gaps to be able to, regardless if it's a marathon like it has been in the past or a sprint as I see it being more today, how do we make sure that we're operating from the same place as it relates to communications? And the reality, Jamy, is that not also the issue that we all face in whatever business we're in today? It's how do you communicate effectively with those that you're engaged with externally and certainly with those that you're engaged with internally as defined by most likely your staff.
I coached for 20 years at the college level, and I've been in a lot of evaluation meetings and had a lot of interaction with athletic directors and presidents about job performance, good and bad. Walk our listeners, our audience through, if you would, a little bit, how an athletic director goes about deciding, what coaches get extensions on contracts, what coaches maybe are going to have to be let go. Talk to us a little bit about those kind of decisions.
Well, everything's unique based upon the institution and the program and the history and the competition within the program based upon who you're playing in your league, that kind of thing. And, it goes without saying that I wish I could give you some big long, lengthy dialogue about all the other things that matter most ahead of wins and losses, but the reality is it's a wins and loss business, and so wins and losses is quite often, if not at the top, at the very near top, because that's just the way we're measured in today's world. So having said that, though, I believe that there are a lot of other surrounding factors that have impact on that, and a coach that maybe is perhaps not winning as handily or as many games as one would like today will receive some grace if they're doing a lot of these other things well. And at the same time, a coach that's winning but yet is mishandling some other things ends up having many times a shorter string to operate on. So what I always cared about beyond just the wins and losses was, how is the coach first interacting and serving and leading his own team or her own team, and that was not only their assistant coaches and their professional staff, but certainly their student athletes and then their the other support personnel that are around them. That's where it starts, and you can evaluate that both with tangible ideation as well as intangible. And then at a state institution, we care deeply about what type image this coach carried into the marketplace as a representative of our university. In many places, these are the leading representatives forward-facing of your institution, along with maybe your president and your AD and that kind of thing. And so are they a good representative of the university? Certainly with the NCAA, it's got to be, you evaluate coaches based upon their understanding of and compliance and the way they handle compliance issues and those kinds of things. Budgets matter. Their hiring, the way they hire those who are around them, all a variety of different things, but and they all matter at some level. And I wish that we could get to a place where that the ultimate benefit to the student athlete is the number one thing that's being evaluated. And I'm still a little bit Pollyanna in that I believe and hope that is one of the most critical elements, but I also have to live in the truth of how we're measured in today's world on the W&L front. So it's a holistic approach. I think if you tended to view a coach out of just the wins and losses and not look at other things, you're really short-sighted. And then obviously vice versa, if you're looking at all these other factors and without consideration of the wins and losses, then that's not going to get it done either. So we, I tried to spend a lot of time, even though I've said I wish I had more time with the coaches, I tried to spend a lot of time with coaches in conversation and have regular engagement with them. And in particular with our revenue coaches, that engagement looked like, both informal and formal engagement. What I'll call the old Tom Peters management by walking around. How are you around the building? Are you at practice? Or you come to a pregame and visit with the coach for a few minutes, or postgame and celebrate or commiserate. But I think that we also had very formal engagement too, and I tried to meet with our coaches at least every couple of weeks at a minimum to not only talk about the short-term tactical elements involved in our program, but certainly the long-term strategic elements involved in our program, to try to make sure, as an administrator, my role was to lead, but also to support. And so what could I be doing to support their program to their ultimate success?
So when you have these coaching searches, and especially at the big-time level that you were at in the SEC, things can get awfully crazy sometimes. What are some of the more memorable searches or stories that you'd like to share or be willing to share with us today? Man, I could write a book. I really could write a book. I think that a couple of things. I'll share a little bit about the Bruce Pearl hire for a second, and then I'll share a football search story as well. When we were getting ready to hire a basketball coach in, I think it was 2005 or 2006 now, I can't remember the exact year. John Curry, who's the current athletic director at Tennessee, he and I were in Chicago. Wisconsin-Milwaukee was playing in the Sweet 16. And our idea was to visit with Bruce when and if his team exited the tournament, and to be ready to do that and to be available to do that. And they lost, and so I called their AD Bud the next day and asked about talking with Coach Pearl, and he certainly gave permission, and as you would expect. And Bruce came to, you got to remember now, this is an SEC opportunity for him, and he came into the interview, I think, obviously ready to go, but still suffering from the emotion of the loss the night before. And we, very early on, one of the things he said to me was that he had really toyed with the idea about whether or not he should come to the interview, which I think is a very interesting leading statement with an athletic director, that we're at a place where you're anticipating possibly getting hired. And as we dove into that a little bit,
he said a couple of things that ultimately made a difference in our decision to offer him the job. And one was that he was feeling the emotion of being with his team and knowing how much he loved his team, and also knowing what he had coming back. And this thought of, can I walk away from these guys? Can I walk away from these guys? So that was one thing, and I'll come back to that in just a minute. And the second thing was that at the time, Steven, his son, was a junior in high school. And he said, my family's so important to me that I'm having a hard time deciding whether or not it would be wise to move Steven in his junior year of high school. And that also was a defining statement for me. So to unpack both of those, the first, to me, it said, well, for me, I wanted a coach who cared deeply about the young men that he was around. So deeply so that they would consider turning down what was most likely a 300% plus pay increase because he loved his kids that much. And you could make the argument, well, he's still suffering from the emotion of a loss less than 24 hours ago, and Bruce is he's an emotional guy, and that's one of his greatest qualities. But it really was, for me, it was a vision into how much he loved the kids and how much he had invested in their lives. And we wanted a coach that was that passionate about the young men, number one. Number two, I value family personally, and I think that I've tried to make good decisions in my career based upon my family. And so the thought process that Bruce loved and cared for his son enough that he was willing to, again, forego a tremendous opportunity, in my mind, to honor and love his son said a lot to me. That also said to me, he valued family, but I felt like that would be reflective in how he would deal with student athletes. And of course, Steven had told him when he had mentioned the possibility of interviewing at Tennessee, Steven said, "Hey, Dad, let's go do this together." And that was a defining moment for him coming to the interview. But, those two things, out of the gate, first part of the conversation, Jamy, and what would ultimately be an hour and a half interview, really determined coach getting that offer. So I think that's one story I would share. And then the other one that's kind of just more humorous than anything else, and it's more to this idea of how much do we know, and as we read our Twitter feed each day about coaching searches and what's true and what's not. I had a member of the local media, as I landed somewhere out west to interview a coach, football coach in this instance, call me and say, "Hey, we're getting ready to run a front page article tomorrow about this particular coach that you've hired, and I just wanted to give you a heads up and see if you want to say anything in advance." And I said, and my attitude about that had always been I was not going to comment to the press about a search, and particularly not during the middle of the search. I would comment when we got to the end game, right? And so I said to this gentleman, I'm like, I owe it to you as a professional, and I owe it to the coach you're referring to as a professional to tell you that unless there is a parallel search going on, I have not offered the job to anyone, and I do not have a coach yet for the University of Tennessee. I think I'm getting close, but I don't have a coach yet for the University of Tennessee. And this gentleman said, well, we have it from our sources that you've made a hire and that this person is going to be your hire. And I said, well, again, I'll just say to you, I've got the search committee with me. We're somewhere getting ready to walk into an interview with a coach right now, and we have not offered the job to the coach that you're mentioning. And if you run that story, you're going to embarrass your newspaper, and you're going to embarrass the coach to whom you're referring. And I would say that your sources are incorrect. And he said, well, we trust our sources, and so we're going to run with the story anyway. And they ran with the story, an iteration of the story. They did back off the concrete nature of their story the next morning. But I always felt like it was unfair that happened, because the reality is it wasn't true. And so as we began to listen to stories in what we'll call crazy season, football and basketball coach hiring season, I just think we need to temper our emotions a little bit, because many times it's one person or a small group of 2 or 3, along with these coaches that are being interviewed, and those are the only people that know actually what's happening. And the rest of it is supposition. And now I know there's demand for information, and everybody wants the latest and greatest information and speculation, and that's why there's subscription services to sites and all that kind of thing. But the reality is, oftentimes it's hearsay, and many sources are not truly sources. They've got an agenda. And so I'm preaching to myself a little bit. I know I need to wait and hear what the actual hires are at the podium when they're announced. But look, man, that's just 2 of a lot of stories I could share on searches. I've had the pleasure to meet a lot of really successful, really highly qualified coaches, and I cherish those memories.
We'll return to the interview with Mike Hamilton shortly, but I wanted to take a moment to mention something that goes hand in hand with what Mike has been passionate about his entire career, and that's making a difference in the lives of young people. Frederick Douglass once said that it is easier to build strong children than it is to repair broken men. Well, we have put together a book that helps student athletes learn how to be better leaders and positive teammates. It's called The Leadership Playbook, Become Your Team's Most Valuable Leader. You see, when we help develop today's students, we are also helping influence the future. Visit theleadershipplaybook.com to learn more about this impactful book. And now back to more insights from Mike Hamilton. Well, turning to your life after athletics, you are very active with charity work, and right now you're the executive director of Show Hope. Tell us a little bit about what Show Hope is and the charity work that you're doing.
Well, so let me start with the end part of your question first. I think if we're going to be involved in activity in our world, it's always great to be involved in something that is part of our own story. So you may or may not know, Jamy, I have 5 adopted children. And so whenever I've been blessed to be involved in a lot of charity work, nonprofit work, ministry work through the years, and almost always it's had some tie to my personal story. And so Beth and I had a foundation when I was at UT called the College Grace Foundation, and we wanted to find great organizations that we could walk alongside and help in the way of donating or whatever. And we had been friends with the Chapmans for some time, and obviously a fan of Steven's music for a long time. And so one of the organizations that we wanted to help support was Show Hope, and we did a major fundraiser in Knoxville for 2 or 3 years to support their work, and I was on their board. And after I left UT, initially I moved to Nashville and served as president of another great organization called Bloodwater, which does work in Africa. And 3 of my 5 children are African; they're Ethiopian. And then had the chance to come alongside Steven and Mary Beth in 2014 to work at Show Hope. And Show Hope does a couple things, 4 things specifically, but it starts out of, adoption is an expensive thing on the front end. It's just typically $25,000 to $40,000 to initiate an adoption, and so we walk alongside families and provide grants for families who are attempting to adopt. And what that looks like now is almost 6,000 families have received grants. The average size grant is $5,000 for adoptions from 62 nations, and that's over the 14-year history of the organization, and that's one of the primary pieces of our work. Secondarily, that's also primary, I guess, but alongside that, the Chapmans adopted 3 daughters. They have 6 children. They adopted 3 daughters from China, and that led to them being called to work in the area of orphan care in China. And for us, it's a partnership to work with children who have special needs in China and to bring them into one of our 5 care centers there in China to hopefully allow them to receive medical care and surgeries to put them in a position to be able to be adopted. And now over 2,500 children have come through those care centers. Any given year, 400 or 500 children are seen there, and at any given time, usually 250 to 300 children are under care. That's a great story, and then we. I say adoption is gloriously hard. We're involved in post-adoptive therapy work. It's research-based work out of Texas Christian University's Institute of Child Development. We help scholarship professionals to receive trust-based relational intervention training. It's a formalized graduate level type training. And then we also do what I'll call a lay program for parents of adoptive children every spring that we broadcast to over 400 locations, and typically between 15 and 20,000 people are a part of that. And then lastly, we have a student initiatives program that is based upon trying to engage students in this conversation around adoption and orphan care worldwide. And the organization is about a $10.5 to $11 million organization. We're based in Nashville, Tennessee, with 21 employees. And we're national/international in scope. And we're obviously blessed with Steven Curtis Chapman's platform as one of the carrying voices of the organization. But it's had a great impact to see the number of children's lives it's literally now thousands of children whose lives have been affected by that. And I'm honored to be a part of that as executive director.
Well, a few years ago when I was coaching basketball at Martin Methodist College there in Tennessee, you came and spoke to all of our student athletes, and you were speaking about Bloodwater mission in particular that day. But I remember you said something that stuck with me and our team as well, and we kind of used that as we were looking at different community service activities, things to do. But you said, essentially, you don't have to go to Africa, but you need to find your Africa. Find something that means something to you that helps out someone else. And so that always stuck with me.
My specific statement was we all need to find our Ethiopia.
Ethiopia,
That's because my kids were Ethiopian. What I believe truly is the opportunity to do good and to help is it can be right down the street or halfway around the world. And our neighborhood borders, our city borders have been wiped away with the way that we are communicating now with our universe, literally. And so I don't believe you've got to go to Africa to make a difference. For those who are called to Africa to make a difference, then I say wholeheartedly go and make a difference. But I believe that often we have needs that are right on our very own streets in our communities, and we need to be, face up to see what those are and to engage ourselves in those opportunities. We are a society that now is one of heads down. We're attached to these units that we carry around with us, our smartphones, and I'm a victim. I'm preaching to myself here again. I do it, but what that does is it keeps our heads down, and I'm telling myself and anyone that I have the opportunity to interact with, we need to be eyes up and to figure out how we can engage in the world and all the turmoil that we may face within our towns or in our communities or neighborhoods or nationally or even internationally. So much of that could be solved if we were willing to have the eyes up and to have conversation. Back to what we started this whole podcast about is this gap in communication, and I believe that that solves a lot of ills and problems in our world if we'll learn how to communicate more effectively.
Well, as an athletic director at any size school, but specifically Tennessee, you were pulled in a lot of directions and always had to be on your A game. And executive director of a charity, you're always giving. So what do you do to help grow and develop yourself as a leader and not just get stagnant?
Well, I'm an active reader, and I love to travel, and those are two things. I try to read 50 books a year. And I've been pretty consistent about doing that for the last 3 or 4 years. That's a big part of what I do. I've got some podcasts I listen to from time to time. Certain folks I follow on Twitter. And some emails that drop into my email box every morning for me to. I take an email every morning from Harvard Business Review and try to read some articles there. I follow Sports Business Journal. Just trying to stay on top of what's happening in the world. That's one thing. That I grew up in a world where the extensive nature of my travel was from Brevard, North Carolina to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. That was it. Now, since that time, I've traveled the world. I've been in, Asia and 11 countries in Africa, and athletics, by the way, took me to most of those places. And the learning experience from traveling and being able to interface with folks who have different views from mine and different lives from mine has been one of the greatest learning experiences I could have ever imagined. And then I'm an inquisitive mind, Jamie. I like to talk to people and find out about their successes and their failures and what they learned from those things. And I think that there's tremendous amount to be learned from just simply doing something as like just talking to other folks and listening and hearing, and sort of having your head on a swivel to see what's going on around you is important too. And so all those things combined sort of lead to my, how do you grow? And I try to be, I'm no Renaissance man or whatever they call it, but I try to also try to always learn something outside of my purview, something that I'm not as maybe well equipped to know about from a knowledge base. What am I learning every day or every week or every month that's new and not something that I have already been exposed to? And I think that's, our world is moving so fast. If we're not doing that, there's no such thing as sitting still. We're falling behind if we're not doing that.
Are you the type of guy that reads multiple books at the same time, or do you read one at a time?
How did you know? I read multiple books at the same time. I'm usually reading about 5 books at one time, and so much of it depends upon the mood I'm in as to what I'm reading at any given time, and they all come from different genres. I tend to read more nonfiction work. Or business books. Every now and then I'll read a novel, a fiction novel. In fact, I just finished John Grisham's latest. But I'm reading a C.S. Lewis book right now. I'm reading the book about the Chicago Cubs 2016 World Series. I'm reading a book called Red Teaming, which is taking through what some of the military tactics are to creating success. I'm reading a book by the guy that started Sam Adams, and I'm reading a book about student athlete suicide. And so those are, just me saying those 4 or 5 to you. You can probably see that there's a variety of different storylines in each of those, and I just find that to be how I engage. I'm not a big TV watcher. I like live sporting events, either going to them or occasionally watching them. But the reading is something that has been important to my life.
Other than being a continual learner and a continual reader, is there a factor or a habit that you've developed through the years that's been key to your successes?
I think it's not so much a factor or a habit as trying to dive in deep to find out and to evaluate the things that matter most to me so that I understand who I am. And this is outside of my faith and family. Let me say that. Family is a huge part of who I am, and I try to spend most of my time outside of my work hours with my family, and then my faith is certainly a huge part of that as well, and has been since I was a young child. But as it relates to, I'll call this my professional life, but it bleeds over into my personal life as well. If I'm reflective, the 3 things that I've found that matter the most to me in the end are being a part of transformational work. And I've alluded to the fact that mattered most to me in athletics, the transformation of lives. And certainly we're able to be a part of that in athletics. I'm able to be a part of that in the nonprofit work that I'm doing too, Jamie. And that's got to be one of the drivers for me in anything I do. Second thing is I want to develop relationships of depth that matter. I'm not my best when I'm at let's say a cocktail reception and there are 200 people in the room and I need to work the whole room and I need to have 200 relationships at the end of the night. That's not my strong suit. I can do it as athletic director. Sometimes you're required to do that. You got to work the room. But I'm my best when I've had intentional conversations with a smaller number of folks, because that's just how I'm structured. I want to have meaningful relationships with people. And then the third thing is I love being told I can't do something. And I love the underdog mentality. And some would say, oh, well, you didn't really face it very much when you're at University of Tennessee. Well, you'd be surprised. And I love being put into places in life where folks say that you've got to get over a boulder to get there. And I love that challenge. And I'm not a dimmer switch guy. My power button is on or off. When you come to visit me late at night and I'm ready to shut it down, I'm going to shut it down. But when I'm on, I'm going to be on, and I'm going to try to give you the best I've got for the time that I'm with you.
Where can people interact with you or learn more about your the work that you're doing? Yeah,
so Twitter is at Mike Hamilton 63, and if you want to follow what Show Hope's doing, it's showhope.org. Right now, Winfred-Henry Partners does not have a website, but you're welcome to contact me at mikehamilton63@gmail.com. And what I do there primarily, Jamy, is I do a lot of nonprofit consulting, executive coaching, professional development work, strategic planning, and just helping people. While a lot of it's been in athletics, a lot of it's also been in the ministry realm and nonprofit realm. And I love to interact with folks. I welcome the connectivity. I hope to hear from some folks.
Well, excellent. I appreciate your time, and we'll definitely put those links in the show notes. And thanks for taking time to share your insights with us today, Mike.
It's my pleasure, and we'll hope to do it again some point.
I enjoyed listening to Mike's stories and his insights. He has done a lot throughout his career, and I encourage you to check out his newest endeavor with Steven Curtis Chapman. The organization is called Show Hope. Also, if you haven't yet done so, please take just a quick second to hit that little subscribe button so that you don't miss out on any future episodes. Thanks so much for doing that. And until next time, remember that success is a choice. What choice will you make today?